Hello, good morning, good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Scott Miller. I'm responsible for marketing here at Actify, and we're joined by Mark Anderson, who is an exceptional Actify product guru, and we're fortunate enough to have him with us today to learn from Mark's insight and experiences, and we'll learn while he delivers the solution demonstration as part of this call. But first, I'd just like to take a quick moment to reintroduce Actify and accurately position our company. So for a lot of people, they perceive Actify as an industry-leading CAD-neutral visualization tool. Now, this statement is absolutely correct. However, it's somewhat incomplete, as Actify provides far more than just a viewing tool. With SpinFire, Actify identified that there was a need for many stakeholders across the enterprise to be able to access CAD data, and that this group of stakeholders perhaps didn't require a full-featured, expensive CAD authoring license, because for their needs, they were simply viewing and extracting the data that they needed from multiple different file formats coming at them from different departments, customers, and the requirements that are needed there. With the central solution Actify provides, it's very similar in nature in the sense that we identified there is a much greater need across the enterprise for stakeholders to access data that could be locked within line of business systems. So with SpinFire, we overcome the challenge of accessing data in proprietary CAD formats. With Central, we overcome the data access, whether it's proprietary line of business systems or through complex folder structures. We overcome the accessibility challenge and help communicate and share data across the enterprise that many of us face that challenge today. But today, our discussion and webinar will be focusing on our SpinFire solution. We do have in the coming weeks a webinar for our central solution, so look out for invitations coming through email soon. With regards to SpinFire, we find that many companies have that need to access CAD across the enterprise, and they might find themselves with numerous different CAD files or with numerous different CAD applications. And in that case, we offer a very flexible fit for small and large organizations in order to meet the CAD visualization needs. We have everything from a single seat and node lock license, a floating license where a seat license can be shared across multiple clients, access through a server, and an enterprise agreement where you might find that this could be a good fit for your organization if there is a large need across your enterprise to view CAD. For the cost of a cup of coffee per day, your enterprise could be accessing CAD on the road, at work, or from home. So if you aren't familiar with some of these offerings, please do check out our website, contact the Actify team to learn more about these solutions. I believe today, during the webinar, Mark will be touching on some new features, but he will also like to address some tips and tricks to help you guys get the most out of your SpinFire software. A couple of things I think he'll touch on is to boost performance, looking at PC settings, application settings, also looking how to get the most out of things like user views and some of the settings within the application. This is being recorded, and a recording will be shared with all registrations to this webinar. Additionally, we'll try and as soon as possible get this up onto the website, where there is a host of other previously recorded webinars for your convenience and access there. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass over to Mark.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
I'm just passing over to you, Mark, now.
Oh, thank you. Okay, can you see my SpinFire?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So yes, good afternoon, everyone. So to begin with, just starting on the home page, this is something that could be quite easily missed, but you can, in fact, of the recent CAD files that you've opened, you can right-click those, and we have all these options here. So we can add those recently opened documents to our SpinFire library over here, which I'll go into more detail later on. And we can import that model into our existing the currently opened workspace. We can also do the CAD to CAD conversion from these recent documents, and pretty much these same options are also in the library tab. And the Explore, that takes you to the folder where the file's been stored, and you can also see the properties on that file from a Windows perspective. So now coming across to our options application page, we have the theme. So but by default it's the modern light, but there's a dark version, there's a classic version. So for those of you that have been long time SpinFire users, that you might have a preference for these kind of icons that you're more used to from using professional. And you can also change the color of the menus and everything here. And what we have here for check for updates. So but by default, the application will check for any new updates every week. But if you're deploying this across the enterprise, of course your IT can control this option. So that can actually be set to never. So as soon as I actually have it on set to never, and I go to my help check for updates, it's grayed out. So that this ensures that you and your colleagues are using the same version of SpinFire and prevent various issues. So if you want to allow for manual, if you don't want to have the a notification about the updates every so often, you can just set it just to only manual, and then you can do the updates when you feel ready to update. And about the recent documents that we had open, by default that's normally 6, but out of my preference, I prefer to have as many as possible, so I have it on 10. And this option here, limit number of undo redos. Typically this value is at 100, but if you're expecting to do a lot of rotations and other little movements, so all those little movements count as a number of of your limit number. So again, that's my preference. I like to have that at about 200 because I've noticed I can hit 100 relatively easy. Coming further down, we have the lock Act3D files when opened. So this means while you're actively using the Act3D file, it means that no one else can come along and open the file and work on it at the same time as you. So that locks it down. But I would exercise some caution over that in case one of your users decides to have it open and they don't close that workspace, and therefore then your colleagues would not be able to open it. So I would suggest you use that with, you be a bit careful of that, using that setting or not. Optimize memory. Sorry, this is a very important setting for optimizing the memory of your that SpinFire uses. So in terms of loading the application and loading and closing loading and closing the files, this manages the memory better in terms of loading, and in terms of closing, it releases the memory back to your operating system more quickly, basically. For those of you that may be using machines with about, let's say, 4 GB of RAM or memory, this setting makes a considerable difference, especially if you're trying to work with large assemblies. And then down here we have the shared settings. So all these settings you can see here, and all the other ones in SpinFire, you can lock those down across your enterprise. So all your spin files can be pointed to to the shared setting file that one of your administrator has configured. I suppose theoretically you could have more than one of these depending on the type of user as well. But if the user has administrative rights with its SpinFire, he can change those settings. So now jumping across to our 3D Viewer tab, what we have here are the colors that can be customized, or rather have their default values changed. So background color, so of course that's the workspace color. We have the highlight color, yellow. we have the grid line, we have the ruler color, and you can define different color, add your own color palettes into SpinFire as well. And what you're going to see for the next 20-30 minutes is how you're able to import and export many of these kind of customizations that you may have in your SpinFire and share that with your other users. So I'll get to more of those options in a moment, but just about these things here, these are the bloom, the simple shadow, etc. All these here and here. These are the rendering effects. I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. And now to rendering effects, the graphic driver. So for those of you that have done a fresh install of SpinFire, perhaps this year, by default the value is auto. So what is meant by auto is that the application tries to choose the best option of this list that it thinks works is best for performance and averting any sort of crashing issues. So and in such instances where the auto hasn't worked out for you in your case, in that instance we would recommend in the first case to try OpenGL 2, then DirectX 11, then 9, and then OpenGL. Now, if you've done that, you think you've seen an improvement or a reduction in crashing, or an improvement of performance, there may be other steps you need to take to get things exactly how they should be. So, or those settings may have not worked out for you. So, what you would have to, the next thing to do in that situation really is to go into just to type in here device manager and come down to display adapters. And the first thing you should probably determine is how many graphics cards your machine has installed. I'll explain that a little bit more detail shortly, but the first thing I would want to do is then check to right-click that graphics card or graphics cards, go to Properties, and then the Driver tab, and see how old that graphic card driver is. Now, I would say anything before 2015 is likely to have a performance issue or crashing issues. So I always recommend to try keep your graphics cards updated as much as possible. In terms of dual graphics cards, which is fairly common with like Dell machines, etc. In the first instance, I would suggest trying to update both of those graphics cards and to then check if your SpinFire has improved. After that step, if there's still an issue, to then to go to the websites of the graphic card manufacturers. So typically this is NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel graphics cards. And just to give you a quick example, so in the case of my machine, this is an AMD graphics card, and you go to their website. The interface is very similar to for the other two graphics cards as well. So you just choose the graphics card, what series, and then the specific version. And then typically when the website takes you to the next page, you then have to choose the drivers appropriate for your machine. So this is obviously the operating system you're using, so Windows 10, for example, and then whether or not your machine is 32-bit or 64-bit. But I imagine the majority of you are using 64-bit operating system. So I would suggest updating both of those graphics cards first, and then the next level to diagnose or address this issue would be to consider disabling one of those graphics cards. But I would suggest you discuss this with your IT or your third-party IT or with Actify support before taking that step. And just quickly on the topic of licensing, if you do have a floating license, you should always use the activate floating license, but always ensure that the server name, the MAC or physical address and the port number are accurate for the machine that is hosting the floating license manager. So if there's been a server machine change, you should change those values appropriately. Then do a license server status, and assuming there's no error message, to then do the activate floating license or network activation, as some of us like to call it. Because after that point, so let's say in your instance, perhaps you have more than one floating license on a particular machine, or perhaps you have, to your knowledge, various performance issues with your network. So sometimes you need to determine, you have to specify a specific port for SpinFire. So in this example, I did a network activation and it pulled down the file to my my end user machine. And you can see here in both the files, it's pulled down, it has the port that was saved in the license file on the floating license manager. So don't try to do online activation because it won't have that port, and yeah, it just causes a number of issues. So if you're a floating license user, you must use the activate floating license. So coming back to about performance and optimization, we have this setting here, static model enabled. Sorry, excuse me. So this setting's benefit will be typically you're loading a large assembly, and what this setting does is optimizes the assembly tree structure. So essentially, if you're doing the rotations, the pans, and everything in your workspace environment, with this setting turned on, and then if you reopen your workspace environment, there may be you may notice a performance improvement in that case. But as soon as you start deleting or adding parts to your assembly tree, you may see degradation. So in that case, what you would have to do is save the file and reopen it if you have been removing and adding parts from your assembly tree for the full benefit of this setting. So coming further down, we have the Defying Materials. So if you're doing those weight calculations, so here are the materials and the density that come with, that comes with SpinFire. You can add your own values in here, your own names and values. And again, that can be exported and imported between SpinFires. And what else do we have? We have the verify volume. So if you're doing volume calculations that should be closed solids, then it may be a good precaution to have this setting on, because it will give you a pop-up warning and say, hey, you know, this model has a gap in it, and so that gives you so that just gives you a nice warning there. Coming down to this section, you can of course include the B-rep. That increases the accuracy for volumes and other measurements, but that does obviously increase the file size, which could in turn increase the loading time. Now, finally, on this page, we have the Define Shortcut Toolbar. So it's a pretty long list. So this is what I've narrowed it down to, like edge length, point to point, some quick and easy measurements I like to use. And we have this option here, show on load. So every time you load that workspace, it's that this toolbar will show up. And but if you don't have this on, because you may not be using it all the time, there's a shortcut on your keyboard, Control and T, to turn that on and off. So actually, if I give you a very quick example of that, do Control and T, you see that? So there's a lot of hidden shortcuts with SpinFire. So if you go to our help website, you'll see more list of examples of things like that. Coming across to the 2D viewer, we have, again, the colors, so the grid line, the markups, the background. We have the graphics driver settings again, the default values and such for the measurements. What we have on this that's not on the 3D is the stamps. Of course, accepted, approved, confidential, etc. Those kinds of stamps you may want to put on a 2D document. You can use these, add your own in here. Again, export, import. And again, actually, there is one thing that, sorry, I'm just coming back to application. We do have 11 languages in SpinFire, and I just remembered in terms of import and export, we have a translation editor. So if you come in and choose a language so if you have a language you want to be using in SpinFire that doesn't exist in SpinFire, you can choose any one of these languages. So I'm going to use one of the Chinese dialects here. I can go in there and I could put another language in, like Greek, for example, and I can save that. I can export it, import it into other SpinFire copies. So, and again, the shortcut toolbar is here on the 2D viewer. Let's now jump across to importers. So these are so as of 11.6.4, these are the importers we support. Now, instead of going through each importer to check or enable or disable things, I can actually just go to this all options and going through the list slowly, you can see where that setting will apply to. So like this attribute one, so that's probably the majority of the importers here, so CATIA, versions, etc. In terms of common issues, what we would typically suggest to try, what settings to change. What always comes to mind is always to have a look at so construction and references. To maybe do import hidden or import and show. The other ones would be the hidden objects. Then there's wireframes. And if you've noticed a discrepancy with perhaps like volume calculations or something, we have the tessellation level here. So I always recommend you do extra high and then retry those calculations, because you should see a more accurate result then. If you do ever experience crashing with a file, let's say NX12 perhaps, one of the things we would always one of the first things we may suggest to try do is to change the document types from both to 3D. Historically, that's always been one of the kind of interim solutions we've had. Yes. So now let's jump over to library. So of course the library are just our connections I've set up. They're going to various local folders of mine, but it could of course be across the network where my machine has access to my user profile. So in this instance, I have a file already open, half the assembly is missing. So what I'll do is, well, because I can't see the full name, one of the things I would like to do is either to switch to this view or Y in the thumbnail display, just to increase this scroll bar here. So there we are, that's the part I'm looking for. And just to point out, just to quickly point out, the bottom left corner, we have a directory search. So if this list did happen to grow considerably, then you have the directory search to obviously first find the folder of interest. And then if you have a lot of files in that directory, then top right, you have the file search. If I type in top, because I know that's part of the name, it shows this part. Now, just like on the home page, in this interface, I can right click, I can import, I can just load just the assembly tree, which is which can be very useful for loading very large assemblies, and you don't necessarily want to necessarily work with everything in that assembly. There may just be a specific part you want to look at. So as soon as you load the assembly tree, you start you start ticking on the assembly tree the parts of interest to you, so you don't have to load it all on the screen. So you can do that here, but you can also do that here, and you can also in a list here. You can hopefully you can see on my screen. It supports like CATIA V4, V5, SolidWorks, etc. So now let's import this into my document. Just a quick reminder, you can in fact select multiples just doing Control left click, but in this instance I do just want to import this one. So there we have it. We have the full assembly here now. So that and it's you can import of the supported CAD formats. You can of course import any of them into the same Act3D file. So it's not just importing specific formats. You can import all the formats into the Act3D file. So now let's do a section cut. So this is a single plane section cut. We can do up to three plane section cuts. We can flip the section, of course. And if I right click that section cut, if I do a projection mode, and let's stretch that, and you'll see here now we have a shadow of the model. Now if I right click and go to calculate, and I click projection area, we get this nice calculation area connection direction. Sorry. So let's hide that for now. Let's bring that section cut back. Let's get it to the middle. You'll notice when you're doing section cuts, it will kind of stop you once you reach sort of halfway in the model. So as I'm dragging this, I know when it's hitting the middle. There, like it clicks in. So I like the look of this cut. So what I'll do is right click the section plane again, and I'll create a 2D document. See that? That's very nice, nice section cut there. 2D image document of it. And like what I mentioned earlier, we've got the stamps, we've got the here we are. Got the smart dimensioning, and of course you can. It's very important when you do notes or measurements. It can be worth if the result is not quite right, or if the smart calculation is not quite the return you were wanting. It's a good idea to always right click and check the options there, whether it's values or you can check all that kind of things just by right clicking in a lot of places, even in an assembly tree. And if you right click, you of course change the color of the arrow, the line. Hyperlink in the notes or even the measurements, you can do hyperlinks to user views that have been saved in the Act3D file, or it could be to a website. So if you click there, you'll see that. So, or even to a file, in fact, not just a website. You can go to a file just by making that shortcut. And if I come back, just quickly mention, once you've got that section cut, you can export that to a DXF as well. So let's do one of the, in terms of one of the newer features, that would be the rule-based coloring. So in this instance, let's do, I want a specific match, and I want the specific match to be green. If it doesn't match, let's do transparent for the moment. And okay, we click add. This is the property type. So we go from, let's go to physical, go to volume, and I want to compare to a certain value, and I want that value to be less than. So let's say 4,000. And if I then do an analysis, So everything that was less than a certain number of the volume, it comes back transparent. Whereas the parts I'm interested in come back with this green. And you also get this output of raw information as well. So stuff that matches and the stuff that doesn't match. That can be copied to a document, that can be exported. So let's say I change my mind, I don't want to do transparent, I want to hide stuff instead. So let's analyze that. And now those parts are hidden. But I'm still getting one thing there that I'd rather it wasn't there. So let's try, well, let's do surface area, value again. Let's do less than. I believe it's 2000. And just to quickly explain, so the logic of the rule, in a sense, it's like an if statement. If any of you know what an if statement is. So the physical property volume less than 4000 and the surface area less than 2000. But the and could be changed to an or. So anything less than or less than 2000 of the surface area. But in this case, I want to do an and. So let's analyze. And now that text we were seeing along the top of this this model, that's now been excluded. And I can see that if I just expand the window. And where it is, there we go, screen plane, yep, so it's there. And of course, you can save that to our user views, just to give you some examples, quick examples of other user views I've done in the past. I'm just opening up this drill case. And I'm going to my views tab. And under the user views here, we have all these different analysis or measurements I've done. So we've got a minimum thickness I've done, a wall thickness. We've got curvature analysis, arc radius, and oh yes, to do a pan view, you just hold your middle mouse button, whereas the left is the rotation. And I'll get a little bit more. I'll go back on that topic in a moment. There's draft angle, of course. There is model compare. So after you've created a model compare, you can. This is a pretty cool feature. You can do the whole adding and removed. You can get a nice close look of what exactly has been removed or added when you're comparing two models. So what I did in this case, a little bit like with the combustion unit, I imported two drill cases with these slight differences in pieces that have been removed or added. Also, coming back to this model, we have these other views. So we have the grid, we have the rulers. You can zoom in, etc., and you have the 3D view still. Coming back to about selection and everything. So when by default, if I was to, let's say, the top half of this assembly, I'll right click that. I'm selecting more than one. I'm selecting this whole component. Whereas if I do the part selection mode and I do that right click, I'm going to be selecting this specific surface. And then if I want to, I have that option to show or hide. And you'll notice when you do a surface selection, it will expand the assembly tree to get you to that point exactly where that surface is in your assembly tree. So let's hide that one. Now it's hidden. I want that back, so I just tick it here. Whenever you're doing any kind of render mode, if you want to do any sort of render modes, calculations, etc., you can always go into your assembly and right click. You don't have to necessarily go in to do that within the workspace environment. So now I'll jump over to, I'll do some, just talk about print preview. So I think since about this has had a number of improvements and new features compared to a year ago. There's so many options now. Just to give you some examples, the more page settings, we can hide the header, the footers. We can adjust the camera slightly if we wish. If you know the value, you can enter it here. We can reset the camera, get that back in the center. We can turn off all these image settings. So now I have a white background, so obviously I save on ink doing that. I can fit the view to the whole page, fit the model to the whole page. So there's lots and options here. And of course, if you have your own template, you want to have a logo, you can do that in this page and some other various pages. In terms of other things, we can in terms of what we can extract or download from SpinFire. If you go to File, Export, and go to the Parts list. So this is not a very big assembly, but just to give you an idea, currently I have this in a sort of flat format. But if I do a multi-level, then you get an idea of the sub-assemblies and everything that each part belongs to. You can see the quantity. Again, the parts list, you can use a custom template. Let's say I want to see some physical properties. So now we see the volume, the surface area, etc. And you again copy, save, and preview. So if I go to preview, there we go. Very nice. So yes, I believe that was just about everything I wanted to highlight to you all today. So thank you for attending, and I'll pass you now back to Scott.
Thanks, Mark. So I believe we had one or two questions, but I think for the most part, I'm aware of time, and I'll pass questions on to you, Mark, if you want to reach out and respond to anyone directly. And of course, still keep passing your questions through using the chat facility. One or two people have mentioned that they've experienced connection issues where their audio was maybe interrupted or their display was delayed, and we apologize for any impact to that experience, such as the nature of a live recording. But I don't believe that should have impacted the recording, which everyone should receive in a follow-up email distributed tomorrow. A couple of people have sent through some requests or feature enhancements, and Mark had made reference to a couple of times, and I think it's worth mentioning again that the help site that Actify offers is a fantastic resource. Please check out the Actify help site for a start. It's a good resource to equip you with all the insight that you need to take advantage of some of the new features that have been added to SpinFire, but also gives you the detail that is within each software release of SpinFire. And again, there is a process for if you do encounter an issue, you can raise a support ticket. The team are very responsive, and I believe you can also get in touch to request enhancements and ideas to further enrich the SpinFire solution. So I would point those nature questions and requests to this portal, because that way it could be included within our internal team, can get a look at that as well. Additionally, I'd like to share, just to put it on your radar, our up and coming webinars. So we do have a webinar on the 13th of September, which will be our central solution that we'll be talking about on that occasion. And additionally, we'll be delivering, I think, alternating SpinFire and Central. On the 27th, we'll be doing a SpinFire webinar. So keep an eye out for the invitations as they come through via email, but also check out the websites. You'll see that if you go on, there is an events source, and within that page, we usually put up our webinar events on that location as well. You'll receive 2 quick questions when you leave this webinar, and I'd encourage you just to take a moment to fill it out. The first one will be, can you suggest some areas of topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars? Again, if you would like to suggest a webinar topic, please reach out to me directly or the team at marketing@actify.com. Additionally, there'll be a question about how do you handle your design data, and we'd love to know your feedback on this. So thank you for everyone who's been able to attend this call live. If you do have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your account manager, or you can fill out a request for more information on the website. We hope to see you at our next call, and from all of us at the Actify team, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.